Hello and welcome back to Lineup Breakdown, analysis of winning lineups. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @bchad50. And unlike in Week 14 or Week 13, when the Steelers dominated both winning lineups, these lineups featured no more than two players from the same team, and it was a more well-rounded roster, not one-team centric. And let's start with the winning lineup of the FanDuel NFL Sunday Million, won by Wakely. That lineup was headlined by Russell Wilson at quarterback. Wilson turned in a big effort, scoring 32.28 fantasy points and spinning 5 touchdown passes. Really a big showing again for him. He's on fire. He's throwing touchdowns. He's not throwing interceptions. Added 292 yards passing. Added another 6 yards rushing. And, I mean, Russell Wilson's a dual-threat quarterback, but he's been really doing it with his arm lately. Baltimore Ravens defense, pass defense is bad, and that continued to be the case this past week. Wilson definitely delivered as a strong option at quarterback, but did so at under 10% ownership. So nice starting point for Wakely's winning roster. At running back, Lamar Miller headlined the backfield as the more expensive back, yet just $6,600 to not bank-breaking back. I had to wait till Monday night to get Miller's performance, but well worth the wait as Miller reached the end zone twice, rushed for 89 yards. He's looked electric the last 2 weeks, and it makes you wonder what the heck were Joe Philbin and former offensive coordinator Bill Lazor doing not involving this guy more on the offense. I mean, every time Miller gets extended run, gets an opportunity to make plays, he basically does. So I don't know what the previous coaches were thinking, but Miller continues to shine. Gamers coming off that big showing in Week 13 from Miller were on him this week. He was owned on 15.2% of rosters, so not exactly an under-the-radar pick, semi-chalky, but definitely delivered for those who used him. The second back on this team certainly wasn't chalky, wasn't under-the-radar pick, and while nobody was really sure what the Saints would do in the backfield with Mark Ingram down for the year, announced that he had a shoulder injury. During the week, it was announced, put on IR. The expectation from most, I believe, was that it was going to be running back by committee, where C.J. Spiller would see some time, Tim Hightower would see some time, but it was the Tim Hightower show. He had not played in the NFL since 2011 prior to latching on with the Saints this year, but that did not prevent Sean Payton from having enough faith in Hightower to give him a career-high 28 carries. The Bucs' run defense, one of the stoutest in the league, allowing the second fewest yards per carry to running backs. But and they were stout again in this one, but Hightower managed to total 85 hard-earned rushing yards, and found Pater also added a reception for 10 yards, and 95 yards from scrimmage and a touchdown resulted in 16 fantasy points from Hightower, and that is plenty at just $4,500 at running back. Was basically a punt salary, but provided a strong RB2 showing for 16 points. So really great diamond in the rough play for Wakely, who took that leap and made that contrarian selection that these GPP winning rosters all seem to feature. And good job on hitting this dart toss with Hightower. Moving on to the receivers, Odell Beckham Jr. was also in that Monday Night Football game, and while Miller was good, OBJ was great. 7 receptions, 166 yards, and 2 touchdowns. 1 slant pass that resulted in a very long touchdown where the Dolphins looked like they didn't even know OBJ was on the football field, which is just inexcusable. But kind of could see that one coming from a mile away, since Football Outsiders ranked them dead last defending number 1 receivers entering the week. I mean, OBJ is arguably the best number 1 receiver in the league at this point. So he did exactly what was expected. He was a chalk play, 24.7% ownership, but the chalk tasted good this time as OBJ turned in a big line. I'm looking forward to this week's matchup against the Carolina Panthers because it means that we get to see some OBJ and Josh Norman. Get your popcorn ready for that one. Next up is a number 1 receiver that has been extremely hot lately and gone from being a run-of-the-mill, ho-hum, okay receiver to just playing at an exceptionally high level, and that's Doug Baldwin. Just 6,800, his price really starting to creep up, but hadn't quite crept up to his level of production of late. And, I mean, he turned in another 3-touchdown reception performance, and that's just unbelievable. 6 receptions for 82 yards, and as I noted, those 3 touchdown grabs. He's caught 8 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, so he is finding pay dirt with regularity. And now his price tag is finally caught up with his production this week, as he's going to cost $7,400 to roster on FanDuel for Week 15. So perhaps they'll suppress his ownership a bit, but I'm not expecting it to really take a huge bite out of his ownership rate as he's facing the Browns this week. Browns have had no answer for receivers this year, and his 17.2% ownership rate, probably going to see something fairly similar this week against Browns, even with the uptick in price. Next up is Brandon Marshall, who, I mean, everybody wants to jump on what's new and shiny at receiver, but Brandon Marshall playing like a number 1, and boy, oh boy, do you think the Bears regret giving him away, essentially. Thought that he was a little long in the tooth, thought that he was on the backside of his career, and, well, obviously, I mean, he's not going to continue to play at this level. He's playing like a number 1 receiver this year, and in Week 14 turned in a line of 6 for 125 and 1 touchdown, and it was his 3rd straight game of reaching at least 125 yards receiving, and his 6th straight game with a touchdown grab. You'd think that a guy as hot as Brandon Marshall is would be owned on more than 15.8% of rosters, but that wasn't the case in the Sunday FanDuel Million this past week, so kudos to Wakely for looking past the shiny new toys and grabbing a veteran that's been playing at an exceptionally high level like Marshall. Definitely got the performance that he was seeking from Marshall in this contest, as Marshall turned in another really good showing against a bad Titans secondary. Tight end was a position that didn't look great coming into the week, but Rob Gronkowski played, caught a touchdown. Greg Olsen didn't turn in the big game that I think some people were expecting. Some of the bargain plays didn't really pan out, but Jordan Reed panned out, and Jordan Reed's been good all year. He did eclipse 100 yards receiving for the first time this year, which is somewhat surprising given that he has had a good season, but went for 120 yards receiving on 9 receptions, one of which was a touchdown grab. Good showing for him on a week where there weren't a ton of huge performances at tight end. So at 5% ownership was a really nice showing that helped set this roster apart from some others. At kicker, didn't get a big point total from Graham Gano, got just 8 points, but it wasn't enough to topple this team out of the top spot. And the Panthers keep rolling. Gano having a hand in that by making his kicks, but that game was out of hand against the Falcons, and the Panthers basically had their way with the Falcons last week. And that included the defense, who round out this team. Defense was a $5,000 expenditure, but if you spent up, you got your money's worth, as they scored over 20 fantasy points this week. They shut out the Falcons while racking up 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, and 2 fumble recoveries. I mean, it's remarkable to eclipse 20 points as a fantasy defense. It's even more remarkable to do so without scoring a defensive touchdown. That was the case for the Panthers this week, as they rattled off 23 fantasy points. Big difference maker at 7.2% ownership, and that's what a winning roster looks like. Wakely scored 205.48 fantasy points, and that was good enough to take down $175,000 in this week's Sunday FanDuel Million. Moving out of the Millionaire Maker, the Brewster was your winner with the final total of 242.88 points. And you'll notice the quarterback looks pretty familiar. Russell Wilson headlined this team as well. A little bit higher ownership on DraftKings at 13.2%. No yardage bonus for Russell Wilson, so his fantasy scoring output was actually identical to what he posted on FanDuel, 32.28 fantasy points, but that is a big showing. Anytime you're besting 30 points at quarterback, you're really getting off to a great start and getting an edge on the competition. The backfield really set this team apart, as Isaiah Crowell, 0.3% ownership, $3,400. So not only was he low owned, he was super cheap and allowed for some spending up elsewhere. And he went nuts, exploded for 145 yards rushing and a pair of touchdowns, as well as 1 reception for 9 yards receiving. 0.3% ownership is one of the lowest owned players that I recall seeing on any of these winning GPP rosters this year. Thomas Rawls was low owned a few weeks ago, but that was in part because Marshawn Lynch was ruled out after the 1 o'clock game started. So really tough to get him in there. I mean, you could get him in there with the late swap, but not everybody jumped on top of that. But Crowell, I mean, 1 o'clock games in terms of not being a last-minute injury replacement, this was a really low-owned player that everybody had an opportunity to go out and use. And the Brewster ended up taking that leap of faith on Crowell against a soft run defense. The 49ers were just incapable of stopping the Browns on the ground, and Crowell had a big hand in that. So huge showing at a tiny salary and at a low ownership rate. That's the kind of game-changing contrarian pick that GPP roster really needs to set themselves apart. But not the only low-owned back that went off in this backfield, and not the only low-owned back that went off for cheap. Eddie Lacy, $4,700, 5% ownership rate. Scored more than 20 fantasy points this week, rushing for 124 yards, a touchdown, and adding a reception for 24 yards. In all, that backfield totaled 56.2 fantasy points at just $8,100. So just a monstrous performance, getting better than 28 points per running back and doing so on the cheap. I mean, that's a huge building block for this roster. And I wasn't buying the Eddie Lacy practice talk going into the week. I mean, coach speak doesn't often turn out as the coaches want it to. I mean, we hear best shape of your life stories in baseball, spring training. This felt akin to that. I mean, every player always has a great practice when a coach wants to get something extra out of them, but or maybe even a smoke screen. But this turned out to be the case. Lacy looked good this weekend. The Packers' running game in general looked good this weekend and this past weekend. And, I mean, they were in a position to run the ball a little bit with Matt Castle just not getting any offense out of the Cowboys again. So game flow really worked in Eddie Lacy's favor as well. Moving on to the receivers, going to be a trio that you're very familiar with, as it's identical to the trio from FanDuel. So I won't spend a ton of time on this other than to say Baldwin underpriced at $4,500. Gamers didn't sleep on that. It was 28.6% owned. The stack paid off for the Brewster in a big way. And while Baldwin didn't surpass 100 yards and get that bonus, 3 touchdowns counted just as nicely as they did on FanDuel, and got a full point per reception for the 6 grabs. So picked up an extra 1.5 from the FanDuel fantasy scoring with the full point per reception at DraftKings. And unlike at FanDuel, where Baldwin's salary got a leap that it deserved for Week 15, Baldwin's is a farce in Week 15. He's $5,800. So if you think the 28.6% ownership rate is high, don't expect it to go down this week at DraftKings. He's going to be a chalk play again this week. And, I mean, I can't see many rosters being built by me that don't start with Doug Baldwin getting slotted in at that cheap salary with the way he's playing of late. Next up is Odell Beckham Jr., who, again, was on the other roster. Big showing, did get the yardage bonus here, so it was worth a little bit more here at FanDuel, or at DraftKings than at FanDuel. Also picked up the full point per reception. Big showing, 26.4% ownership, a little bit higher than at FanDuel, but I would attribute that mostly to the fact that there's a flex play on DraftKings and not on FanDuel. Finally, Brandon Marshall rounded out the starting receiving positions on DraftKings. 19.3% ownership, $7,600. And another big showing. And again, like was the case with OBJ, a little bit higher ownership rate at DraftKings than FanDuel, but again, probably a product of the fact that there's that flex and you've got the extra skilled position player to slot in. Moving on to some plays that were different than the other roster, we got 3 completely unique plays at tight end, flex, and defensive special teams. Julius Thomas slotted in at tight end. Didn't put up the showing that Jordan Reed did. Didn't need to. 8.1% ownership at $4,200. Allowed for some salary relief, but not without production. He did total 54 yards receiving on 5 grabs and found the end zone. 16.4 fantasy points was the second lowest scoring total on this winning roster, but certainly didn't derail them, getting almost 4 points per $1,000 spent. Pretty good showing for Julius Thomas. If you can reach the teens in your tight end position and spend under $4,500, you're doing a pretty good job. At the flex, took advantage of the full point per reception by slotting in a receiver. Not something that's unique, pretty common play, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And in this case, grabbed another number one receiver, Alshon Jeffrey, $6,900, was just 14.1% owned against the Redskins, and turned in a 6 for 107 and a touchdown line. Was the fourth member of this team to earn a yardage bonus, and also was another member of the team to find the end zone. And really the only member that didn't find the end zone was the team defense. So big showing from this offense, this GPP lineup. A lot of touchdowns, handful of yardage bonuses, really great picks by the Brewster. The defense for this team is the white-hot Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chiefs didn't score a touchdown, but that's really the only blemish on their the Chiefs' defense didn't score a touchdown. That's really the only blemish for them. They yielded only 3 points to the sputtering Chargers, recorded 5 sacks, and also added a interception as well. They are on fire of late. They have another good matchup this week. Expect their ownership to hover right around 20% like it did in this contest. 17% ownership in the Millionaire Maker. Probably going to be right around that again this week. And that's going to wrap things up for these winning rosters. If you're looking to win big, I would suggest checking out dailyfantasycafe.com, where we've got some awesome tools such as Colossus, our lineup optimizer. We got the stack generator, which will let you get some stacks that you can put into Colossus and allow Colossus to do its work building around those high-scoring stacks. Also have some great content such as the articles and the video podcasts like the one you're watching. And if you're not just a football gamer, we got some content for the NBA, the NHL. We got some golf content coming up. We've got content for basically everything daily fantasy you could imagine. And hopefully, if you're paying attention this week, we can highlight some big plays for you that maybe put you in this article. And we'll be talking about your $1 million winning roster in the Millionaire Maker, or your 6-figure winning roster in the Sunday FanDuel Million. Until next week, good luck.